An often overlooked tragedy in the Syrian war has been the thousands who have disappeared without a trace. While we can count the number of people killed, injured, and made homeless, those forcibly disappeared have been left without a voice. Now, the UN Human Rights Council is demanding accountability. On Tuesday, a resolution backed by Turkey, the US, Qatar, and several European countries voiced alarm over the thousands of Syrians who have vanished. It strongly condemned the use of enforced disappearances, particularly by the Syrian regime. Nearly 500,000 people have been killed in Syria's decade-long war. Several million fled to other countries, but many who were unable to escape sought refuge in Syria's northwest province of Idlib. A shaky ceasefire is barely holding there. Turkey and Russia, although supporting opposing sides in the conflict, have worked to stabilize Syria's north. And to discuss where Syria is headed, joining me now from Istanbul is Sener Akturk. He is an associate professor at Koç University. Also from Istanbul, Navvar Saban is a conflict analyst at the OMRAN Center, a think tank that specializes in Syria. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. Sener, just recently, the UN Human Rights Council has called for those behind enforced disappearances in Syria's 10-year-old civil war to be held accountable. What's your take on that? Is this a positive step taken forward to punish those responsible, or it's just a symbolic one?
It is a positive step, however symbolic, because any step that takes us closer to treating, from an international legal point of view, the Assad regime as one that committed war crimes is a positive step. It has always been my view that the way the Assad regime should be treated is the way that Slobodan Milosevic regime in Serbia has been treated. So this is a small, somewhat symbolic, but still progressive, important, positive step in that direction.
So, Navvar, could you talk to us about the latest in Idlib, having suffered brutal civil war and COVID-19 pandemic? How are they doing in the northwest of the country?
So thank you for having me. Situation in Idlib, even before the new wave of international meeting that recently happened, the 16th round of Astana, the meeting in regard of the crossing, was terribly wrong when it comes to ongoing artillery attack from the regime side, raids from the Russian warplane. Also, the internal security situation is still fragile. So the situation, it's sum all together with the COVID-19, with the crisis of the economic situation. It was a very devastated situation. What made it worse in May and June was the massive increase on the Russian attacks on specific area on the southern of Idlib, which was a Russian mechanism to put more pressure on the international communities before the new round of the international meeting. It's a old tactic from the Russian. Whenever there is a new round of international meeting, they do that. Those attacks were random and affected civilians. More than 80 civilians were killed due to these attacks. Unfortunately, even before these international meeting, the Astana and the crossing border meeting, the attacks still continue until this day.
So isn't this a violation of the ceasefire reached between Turkey and Russia? And do you believe that Idlib needs a renewed agreement by Russia and Turkey moving forward?
It is a massive violation, big violation, but the Russian media always have the excuse, which is the presence of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. But if we look at the number of the attack, and if we analyze these attacks, only 5% of the attacks that happened in May and June were targeted against any armed faction, not only Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Most of the attacks were against civilian location, farmer, houses. So the Russian always claim that these attacks are against the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, that we postponed or we stopped the joint patrol with the Turkish on the M4 because of the extremists. So there should be a new agreement that redefine those points related to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or other extremists in the area, because it's becoming an old record used by the Russian always, that we will continue the attack against southern Idlib, against random area in Idlib because of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. But numbers doesn't lie. When you look at the number, you see that less than 5% of these attacks from the Russian and the regime were against any armed faction. So it's obvious what the Russians are trying to do: put more pressure on the Turkish side, put more pressure on the community inside Idlib, make it more fragile, destroy infrastructure, make it a very harsh environment to live in, and prepare for any possible military attack in the future.
Okay, so Sener, we know that prior to the UN Security Council vote, Russians insisted on aid to enter the region through regime-controlled areas instead of Iraq and another 2 points from Turkey. Why do you think that the Russians insisted on that? And we finally saw that the US and Russia struck some kind of a compromise that prevents catastrophic shutdown of the life savings to aid to Syria. So what's the significance of this? Are they seeing some sort of common ground in the region?
Russians insisted that the aid go through the regime-held areas because they want to basically suffocate the Syrian National Army Free Syria zone in northwestern Idlib, in northwestern Syria, and they have attempted to do this in the past as well. It's a positive step due in part to United Nations and the other Security Council members, permanent and non-permanent, that the aid delivery has been renewed for another year instead of 6 months. But this is the minimum that the international community can do for northwest Syria, for Idlib, which after all is not just Idlib. If you consider northwestern Syria under Syrian National Army and Turkish security forces and another up to 4 million Syrians in Turkey, together this is almost 1/4 of Syria's pre-war population. These are major stakeholders. Any negotiation of Syria's future has to take into account 1/4 of Syria's population, which needs to be represented in politics, in military, in bureaucracy, in the security forces, in any future Syrian resolution. Lacking such a resolution, the minimum that the international community can do is to freeze the current borders of Idlib. You mentioned previous agreements. The previous agreements have been violated many times. The Sochi agreement between Turkey and Russia actually gives Serakib, Marat Numan, and Han Sheyhun to the Syrian National Army Free Syria zone. But all three of these towns have been occupied by Russian-Iranian-backed regime. So the minimum that is necessary is the current status quo. Any violation of this would risk an all-out war and humanitarian catastrophe in Syria.
So, Navvar, is a cooperation likely between Russia and the US? And if so, how would this impact Turkey's presence in the region?
It's difficult to understand what actually happened in regard of this meeting. There was lots of talk from the eastern part of Syria that the Russian wants the area which is under control of the PYD SDF to be more connected to the Damascus Central, which means that they want to limit the role of the PYD court. They want to limit the PYD, any official organization or institution that operate with the civilians. So what the Russians are trying to do is to eliminate the role of the SDF and PYD when it comes to administration side. This was the most significant thing that we heard about what was given and take, why the Russian agreed about the crossing border to be reactivated for 6 months. It's very important also to mention that the American wanted also Al Yaroubiya to be active in this round, which is like held in the SDF held area. That was a big no, for the Russian, and also it goes in a harmony with what we are hearing, that the Russian wants the area to be connected more administration side to central of Damascus, limiting the role of the SDF and the PYD. At the same time, what the Russians are trying to do, always trying to have more communication with some of the armed group in the SDF held area, within the SDF itself, trying to pull them, trying to create some kind of a new rule in that area. So I don't think that the American and the Russian are in harmony, but I think that it's necessary evil at the time being. If that deal was not happened, it will affect a large number of civilians. But that can also proven that if it's right what was happening in the East, and the Russian wants to change the whole diagram in the East, it makes us think that the American are step by step becoming not interested a lot on having full control in the eastern part of Syria.
Yes, because we know that they have largely avoided grappling with the policy challenges that Idlib presents. So, Sener, we know that there are stark differences between Turkey and the United States on various issues, but the U.S. support to terror organization YPG is considered existential. How do you think the two countries would find a common ground to work on this issue, and where does Russia stand when it comes to supporting the YPG?
Russia and the United States unfortunately share a common point in Syria. Both Russia and the United States are supporting very tiny ideological ethnic sectarian minorities. Right? It is the Kurdish socialist faction, which is a minority with an ideological minority, with an ethnic minority, maybe 1 or 2% out of 10%. And Russia and Iran are supporting an ideological minority within a sectarian minority, Baathist, socialist, Alawite minority. So both of these positions are unsustainable. They are trying to sustain basically apartheid states that rely on heavily armed, very tiny minorities. Turkey has sided with the demographic majority in Syria from the beginning, and it is the only major regional actor to do so even to the present day, and that's Turkey's advantage with the ordinary Syrian Arab citizen and also going forward. Then United States would do well to scale down its involvement in Syria and to pass on some of these responsibilities to Turkey. It has done well not to openly oppose Turkey's operations, such as Operation Peace Spring, that liberated much of Ras Al Ain and much of Eastern Euphrates. And this is a positive kind of example that can be followed in the future, however, through peaceful negotiations.
So, Navvar, we see dramatic policy shifts in the Middle East now. Iran has a new leader. How do you think Iran's new leadership impact the region, and would Iran's new leader, Raisi, be different than his predecessors? What kind of an Iranian policy we're likely to see in the region, especially in Syria?
Thank you. Iran, when it comes to Iran and their situation in Syria, lots of incidents had a direct effect on how Iran want to be present in Syria. First of all, they shifted in 2018-19 from the military actual presence to have more presence or influence when it comes to the economy, community, society. After that, we saw the death of Qasem Soleimani, and that had a major effect on the Iranian presence in Syria, especially in Deir ez-Zor. And then come the Biden administration, and finally the Ibrahim Raisi. So the major goal did not change. They will keep on saving their location. They will keep on investing on local entity in Syria. It's very important to know that Iran, since 2018, knew that if they want to invest in their actual presence in Syria, they need to have more interaction with the local entity in Syria. Thus, they began infiltrating the military, security branches, and then the community economy. So this is the first thing that is going to keep continuing, which is the investment in local entity, trying to protect their interest in Syria in a very long term. The Iranian works in a very slow way, trying to achieve long-term goal using local entity. We recently saw that people said that the Biden administration might have different approach to the Iranian. Actually, we are witnessing that the Biden administration is trying to separate different file, separating the nuclear agreement, then the Iraqi file, then the Syrian file, and it's backfired a lot against the American. We are witnessing what's happening in Deir ez-Zor with a very limited counter action from the American. The Iranian are trying to rebuild or restructure the whole rule of engagement in Deir ez-Zor, and unfortunately, they are in a way success until now, because We are witnessing what's happening in Deir ez-Zor. So they will, in a very short term, they will keep continuing on investing on the local entity.
Yeah, they'll be using, as you say, they'll be using their soft power, at least for the short or middle term. All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining us on Straight Talk.
Thank you.